You are listening to the Outside the Boards podcast. I'm Danny O'Leary. For most of my professional career, I have worked in mainstream sports for some of the world's leading sports organizations and properties and blue chip brands, helping to create award-winning omni-channel marketing campaigns, result-driven sales strategies, and impactful brand building initiatives. But all that work doesn't compare to the fun, excitement, and challenges I've been fortunate to experience working for the king of all sports, polo. For nearly a decade, I've put my heart and ambition into helping advance the sport of polo. I've made lifelong friendships, met some incredible people, traveled to memorable polo destinations, and heard the craziest stories. My goal is to share these people, places, and stories with you and provide a unique behind-the-scenes perspective of the game that breaks all the common stereotypes, all while discussing key issues affecting the sport today and the constructive sharing of ideas, insights, solutions, and best case studies for the purpose of advancing polo globally. Every week, I will have honest conversations with polo industry leaders, enthusiasts, and awe-inspiring people who make this sport great and fun to be around. I hope through their knowledge and their unique perspectives, they will motivate and inspire you. Together, we will explore ways you can make small tweaks to boost your polo business, whether you are a club, event, team, or player, that will amount to big changes in revenue, participation, attendance, and exposure. Saddle up. Welcome to Outside the Boards with me, Daniel O'Leary. Danny O'Leary here, and welcome to Season 2 of the Outside the Boards podcast. On this episode of Outside the Boards, I'm really excited to introduce player, patron, and co-founder of the Women In Polo Network, Miss Dawn Jones. Dawn Jones is one of the most active women in American polo, both on and off the field. Some may know her as the wife of actor Tommy Lee Jones. However, she has grown into a well-known figure and power within America and women's polo in her own right. Dawn is a professional photographer by trade and WIPN's connector and fundraiser extraordinaire. With a 1-goal mixed and 6-goal women's handicaps, her home base is the San Saba Polo Club in San Saba, Texas. You will find Dawn supporting women's polo and playing in tournaments around the globe. Dawn has made it her mission to create opportunities for women to play polo through the Women In Polo Network, which she co-founded with Pamela Flanagan, a guest you might recognize from Season 1. Dawn mentors young players and advocates for women to compete at the highest level in polo. Dawn is incredibly bright and one of the most motivated and ambitious leaders in the sport. She has become a great friend, and we share some of the same interests and ideas surrounding this beautiful game. Dawn continues to do great things for the game and women's polo as she continues to advocate and mentor many people. I'm happy to commit my time to her efforts. So let's get started, everyone. Enjoy. Dawn Jones, we finally get together. Although I will tell you, we probably had equivalent to 3 hours of worthy podcast content before recording today.
Yeah, I'm pretty loquacious. Till your eyes glaze over.
You've been so highly recommended by so many people and friends of mine within polo, Pamela Flanagan, Fred Mannix. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, you've just been a profound leader within women's polo today. And I'm excited to talk to you about that. You're an icon to so many. So I'm thrilled to finally have you after multiple emails and text messaging and then have the luxury of speaking with you on hours on end about so many polo different subjects prior to today's podcast. So like I said before in our last call, I think we're best friends now. I think we can maybe call each other besties.
Oh yeah. I agree with that. I mean, well, that's the great thing about polo. You meet so many interesting people in the sport. And it's not a very large community. It's a familial community, and everybody knows pretty much everybody. And you develop friendships because we have a lot of common interests. And whether you play the sport or you just enjoy watching it or you're a fan of the sport, you have connections that are meaningful.
That's 100% right. That just echoes so many conversations I've had with people over and over and over again. But with that said, then I'm very curious as to how you got involved in this sport. Are you looking at a Hope Ariano type scenario where you come from generation after generation? Is this something that you got into in your mid-30s? What lured you into the sport?
My relationship with Tommy, my husband.
Mm-hmm.
we dated and courted each other for about 7 years, which was too much time for my own dad's interests. I mean, he's a very provincial guy and was not too happy about me living with a guy 18 years older than me. But when we finally got married, my husband looked like he was at a shotgun wedding, and my dad was delighted. So it only took 7 years to convince Tommy to marry me, but it was important for both of us. But in the early days of our courtship, it was clear to me when I met Tommy, and one of the first things we did together was attend a polo game. And it was obviously clear that he had a passion for horses and ranching and the sport of polo. And when I met Tommy, he was spending time with Cecil Smith, who was very old at that time. But, I got to know more about Cecil and his family and the Barry family. I did not meet Harold Barry, but I met Joe Barry, which was one of the most beautiful horseback riders I'd ever seen, years after I started in the game to learn and keep growing as a player. I remember seeing him over at Isla Carroll near Houston, and it was in the afternoon, and there was a silhouette of a man riding a horse in between some oak trees on the side of a polo field. And I thought, God, that's the most elegant, beautiful rider. This man is so light in the saddle for his size. And I got close enough to see it was Joe Barry out there by himself.
Was this courtship taking place in Texas at the time?
Well, yeah, because Tommy and I, we actually initially met on a film called The Good Old Boys. It was his first film to direct for Turner Network Television. And it was based on a book by Elmer Kelton, who had written for the Livestock Weekly. He was from Crane, Texas, and was within living in San Angelo, which was also a family town for Tommy with the Scott side of his family, his mother's side. And The Good Old Boys was sort of a book that appeared after another very important book in Elmer Kelton's canon of writing, which was called The Time It Never Rained, about the 1950s droughts in Texas. So Tommy favored this book, The Good Old Boys, which has a lot of humor. And it's an interesting period in time in 1910 when there was this transition from the old cowboy ways to the new technology of automobiles and communication. That his character, Huey Calloway, wasn't quite ready for the future, but his nephew, Cotton, played by Matt Damon, one of his first films he ever did after he dropped out of Harvard, was The Good Old Boys. And Matt Damon's character, Cotton, is interested in automobiles, and he eventually becomes an automobile mechanic and specialist. But it was a lovely film to work on. Both Tommy and I he'd been mostly working in California too, and as I was, and I was certainly homesick for Texas and was looking for films that were working in Texas. And we ended up on this film, The Good Old Boys, and he shot that in about, I'd say, 42 days, maybe less. And it was a lot of work. We worked a lot of hours. And in the course of making that film, there were a lot of horses involved. Sam Shepard was in the film. Francis McDormand was in the film. Francis Kenny, Wilford Brimley, Sissy Spacek. I mean, Matt Damon. It was a really remarkable cast of players. And we were out there in the middle of nowhere in Alpine, Texas, with a lot of horses and wagons and stuntmen and wranglers, horse wranglers. It was really fascinating to see him so involved in the storytelling of this story from 1910 and this character, Huey Calloway, with his horse Biscuit. I loved watching him ride. And when you're working on a film as a crew, as you know, from your experience in production, you become like a family. And you can relate because there's so much pressure and so much hardship. And there really is during the course of making a film. You can really identify with people on that crew and become close
especially
friends.
in the middle of nowhere, as you described.
Yeah. So shortly after that film, he was working on Batman Forever, and I was working on a film with Lou Gossett Jr. in Los Angeles. And we ended up having a nice dinner and reminiscing about the good old boys in that part of West Texas and both missing home. And from that point forward, we just continued our friendship, and then courtship evolved. And, it was clear to me, though, in the early days of that time with Tommy, in Texas in particular, he was really passionate about polo. And even though he was interested in raising Brangus cattle and a cow-calf operation on the ranch in San Saba, the Fleming Springs Ranch that he's owned for 40 years, he made room for 2 polo fields and plenty of stabling and an arena regulation. And he was committed to the game. And he said, I want to introduce you to the Polo family. And I didn't really know what he meant at the time, but after a few games and meeting some of his friends in the game, from H. Ben Taub to the Beal brothers. I never met Carlton Beal, but I knew his widow, Kelly Beal's mom. And I just met a lot of old timers. Willie B. Wilson was still around. The Galindos, there was Chango Galindo, Hector's brother, and Carlos's brother. It was just really fascinating to me to meet these people that were so passionate about this game. And he's the one that got me into it. And I really wanted to try to learn to ride. I'd never ridden a horse other than being a passenger. And I was about 30 at the time. And I've been an athlete all my life, playing water polo and tennis. And I just thought, I can give this a try. And it's a whole other thing. I mean, this is another animal with its own mind, its own fears, its own desires, and its own determination. And to harness that and do it confidently, takes time. As Tommy said, learning to play polo and ride is like learning to play the violin. You can't just pick up a fiddle and faded love the minute you pick it up. You just can't. So, I tell it to, beginner players when they get frustrated. It's like learning to snowboard too. You just can't do it the first minute you get up on the board. I don't care how good your balance may be. But in polo, it's more complex because you're dealing with something with a mind of its own, and it's 1,000 pounds, and you've got other people in the field with you, and you have to have full field awareness. So, in the early days of my polo that Tommy introduced me to, and he was really pleased that I wanted to learn, but, it was a source of a lot of domestic squabbles because I wouldn't do what he wanted me to do. And I had this other way of doing it that I thought was better. And I had a lot of more desire than ability. And he was really trying to break me of that in a good way, you understand the rules of the game. And as an English major from Harvard, specifics are important. Details are important. And he gave me a blue book. He's like, okay, go read this. Even though it evolves each year, there could be rule changes here and there. But he's the reason I got into polo. And I was about 30, 31 when I first started learning to ride and play at the same time. My first teacher outside of working with Tommy, because we had our frustrating moments, as I just mentioned, was Carolyn Stemmel out at the Midland Polo Club. It's her husband, Harley, and her boys play. And she took the time to help me to learn some basic riding skills and basic hitting skills, and just to go relax with the horse out in the dunes between the mesquite trees outside of the club. It's her help that really, pushed me to another level. And then Chongo Galindo was telling Tommy Lee, lucky you are. You got some woman in your life that wants to play polo. Come on. Because we'd have little disagreements and sit there silently at one of the great Mexican restaurants in Midland. And Chongo just looked at us like, come on, Tommy Lee. You're really lucky to have this person in your life. It was, early stages of relationships. There's always these sort of moments where people give each other the silent treatment. But really, the combination was like this perfect sort of environment for me off the ranch to be in Midland, Texas, to see, Bart Evans, who was this amazing player, and Willie B. Wilson, who's his older sponsor player that was a maverick in his own right, and his son, Byron, and the Beals, Musselman family. There were a lot of people there. And as I said, the Galindos, they really turned it around for me and opened my eyes about the beauty of the game and the love of the sport and the familial care of the game.
Yeah.
And I think, it's with Carolyn's help and Chongo Galindo's support, and even Bart Evans, who was considered more or less a little bit of a misogynist in terms of, he supports the game. He was at a polo game in 2006 watching 26 goal that I had the joy of being able to play in for Tommy, and he was there and had no negative comments to say about it. I love seeing him there that day, and I haven't seen him around polo in a while. I see his son Gene every now and then in Santa Fe. But the point of the story is that there's this big collection of individuals and people that are involved in the game that Tommy introduced me to right out of the box, right? And I didn't have a generation to generation of polo players to inspire me or start me in the game. I just had this athletic ability and desire to create a bond between Tommy and I that would be healthy for our relationship. And even regardless of the domestic squabbles, in the long run, it has been one of the most bonding, healthiest decisions that we've made together, because the film industry is a lot of pressure. It's not easy. There are a lot of marriages that survive in the film industry, and there are many that don't. And it's not easy. Every marriage you've got to work at it. But he and I have managed to make it through some of the most difficult films and most demanding in various locations in the world, and travel schedules and working nights and all of that, and still sit and talk about horses.
Yeah.
Or plays, Okay, Bob Skane was one of his mentors, and he made it through the Bataan Death March in the Philippines with the Japanese in World War II as an Australian soldier captive by remembering all the polo plays he'd ever made and through each game in his mind. And I really regret I never met Bob Skane. I met his widow, and she was wonderful in Santa Barbara, but I never met Bob Skane. And my husband still, to this day, speaks so highly of him, as his demeanor on and off the field as a gentleman with his pith helmet playing the game. And the passes weren't booming passes, but they were precise in a teacup, just 30 yards at a time. And that's what Bob Skane could deliver.
Now, you said that Tommy was already playing polo when you guys started your courtship. When did he get his start then? Was it not that long ago, or was it fairly earlier?
It was in the 70s when he left New York off Broadway, when he was working on Broadway in soap operas and One Life to Live, for instance. He was Dr. Mark Tolan. And he had a disagreement with the director, and the director decided to fire him. And so his character, which is much beloved, Dr. Mark Tolan, became a homicidal maniac, killing patients in the hospital. So they got rid of him in about a week or 10 days. And Tommy was fine with that. And he was wondering, how is it that you get, really great theater roles, starring roles in the theater? How is that? And some of the actors in New York were like, well, you've got to become a star. Well, okay, how do you do that? Well, you got to do a major motion picture. And he'd already done and gotten his Actors Equity card with Love Story, which was an interesting story, coming in for casting. Just graduating from Harvard, playing Harvard football, one of the most famous games in the Ivy League called The Game, where Harvard beats Yale 29-29. He went to New York and auditioned for this role. It's the friend to the lead role in Love Story. So he goes into the audition, and the casting director is this woman, and she just looks up at Tommy and says, no, you're not right. You are not the right guy. In fact, these Harvard foot players are very special and unique. And here my husband had just finished one of the greatest games in the Ivy League history as offensive lineman, number 61 for Harvard. But he got another chance to get in there and do it again. So he didn't have an Actors Equity card. He didn't have a SAG card. It's like a chicken and the egg situation. And what comes first? But he managed to get it just cunningly. Look, I just left it at home. So he got his audition at the second go around and got the part. Then he ended up going out to Los Angeles and did a Roger Corman film. And that was the film that started his career. But while there, he decided, well, okay, I love to ride. So he was doing a little bit of roping. But then he saw a little bit about polo on the West Coast, and he thought, I ride horses. I can do that. I want to try that. I want to maintain an athletic life. Even though I lived in New York, Manhattan for 7 years, working on my career in the theater and television and even film. Now I want to do something on the West Coast, and what can I do to maintain an athletic life? So he called up Dr. Billy Linfoot, which is Corky Linfoot's father, Laura Linfoot's grandfather, and just called him and said, my name's Tommy Lee. I want to come and learn to play polo. And Dr. Linfoot's response was, all right, meet me at Menlo Park at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Click. That's all there was to it. And Tommy went. He flew from LA to San Francisco, and he went to that first lesson. And he was hooked, hook, line, and sinker. The precise date of that, I don't know. But it was definitely in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, you couldn't also ask for a better teacher, too, at that time.
Exactly. So Tommy has a lot of Billy Linfoot-isms that he brings up over the course of the time that I've been learning. And it has been very influential in my thinking of time with a horse and time on the field. And I have such a high respect for the Linfoot family and a love for them. I really do. And I love that Dr. Billy Linfoot and his wife were both vets. She may have been better than he was, according to the stories I've heard. And, I love Corky and Kathy, and obviously Laura, I care for very deeply. And her two little girls are like, the 250-foot girls. They are some big girls.
Yeah.
These twins are huge. And they may be future polo players. So I'm excited about that because I like to see more women play. But is that the answer to your question about how I started in the game and how it happened, and how long Tommy has been in the game? Because he was in it well before I arrived on the scene, and we met around 1994. So he'd been playing for at least over a decade before I met him.
Well, you do mention some commonalities that I've been noticing from talking to people. There's some obviously who have a deep equestrian background that they were gravitated towards polo because they enjoyed the camaraderie, the team aspect, and so on and so forth. But both of you came from technically other sports in retrospect, and wanting to keep that level of competition and so on and so forth. Polo was a great transition, especially for Tommy, who played football. Larry Ashbrook, who is a polo patron and club owner here in Elgin on the Chicago Polo Association, he came from football and he gravitated over to polo. So it's great to see that because, I tell people all the time, like, look, if you play X, Y, and Z sport, if you're playing football, if you're playing rugby or something like that, things that require a little bit of an adrenaline. And if you enjoy the equine aspect of it, then you're going to fall in love with this sport so quickly. And not to mention telling people that regardless of how athletic you are, if you're picking up the sport, you're going to learn very quickly about muscles that you've never used before.
This is true. And the team sport element is also very valuable. I
Yeah.
mean, meeting 100 jumpers in Wellington who just now are getting into playing some fun chuckers that are available when they can rent a horse and play some chuckers, maybe with like Kylie Sheehan's, Flying Cow, her program or
Mhm.
other programs that exist and the lower level, beginner level that thank God they do because, give them a chance. Obviously, they're proven riders. They're professional horse people in their jumping or dressage world, but to be able to leave that, highly technical and extremely disciplined at their level and be able to come to a more casual level of like what you might have seen in certain parts of Texas, cowboy polo, and then have a barbecue or meet at the cantina later. That sort of activity is really enjoyable. There's no pressure. It's a lot of fun. You meet new friends. That's what we're all looking for, right? And it's certainly
Mhm.
then when you get to the higher levels of the players that are really serious about their sport and professionals. That's another discussion. But
Yeah. When did then you kind of hit your stride? You said you're in your 30s when you kind of picked this up. Was there a time where you felt as though like this is you're flying now, you're starting to be in tournaments and so on and so forth? Is it something you picked up right away, or did it take a few years to really get immersed in it?
no, it took a while. And I think part of it too is that again, I love the game, but Tommy and we have careers elsewhere. I mean, I'm a still photographer in the film industry, and obviously he's a writer, producer, actor, director. And that's what we do that's our day job, right?
Yeah.
And polo for us has always been something we've just enjoyed when we can get to it. So my evolution in the game as an athlete, as a rider, and as a player, I think took a lot longer than if I'd had some full-time access to it. And of course, that defines a lot of sponsors, right? Which is what I'm considered as a sponsor. I mean, I never had the ambitions of being a pro. I just like doing well at athletics, whether it be tennis or the water polo or football for fun. But it took me a while. Again, it was a pastime and something Tommy and I could enjoy together. And he was sort of leading the charge in terms of the high goal, and I got a chance to play some high goal. I felt like, in 2002, I was playing in practice with Sugar Erskine and a few other players. I think it was Pancho Benzadone. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but we were having a lot of fun at IPC, and I felt good about the level of play. I felt like at that moment, if I'd played enough co-ed polo, maybe I might have made it to 2 goals. I mean, the horses were right. I was feeling right. But I will say this, looking back, my style of riding was completely wrong. I mean, I had stirrups way too short, but for some reason
Mhm.
I felt comfortable with that. Now I've got them really long. I have quail legs to begin with, so I need all I can get to get my legs around the horses. And I look at someone like Nina Clark and, or these other tall women who play the game and tall guys, they really
Yeah.
have partial advantage of being able to get the legs around the horse so efficiently. But also, I didn't realize this, but I heard from some that they have a higher center of gravity issue that can be kind of daunting. Whereas for me at 5'4" and almost 5'5", I mean, I have a low center of gravity, so it's like a jockey almost, and I feel like I'm really more one with the horse, I suppose. But it was probably 2002 when I felt like I was really coming in my own, understanding the rules of the game, field awareness, playing the position number one, which most sponsors do. But I felt like I was doing well. I mean, Outback 14-goal league. In 1 year, I scored over 50 goals, which I was really proud of for a sponsor, to make
Yeah.
that, happen and be rewarded for most goals scored in a season was a lot of fun. And we were playing with some great players. There must have been 14 teams to finally win that damn silver coated plate.
Mhm.
They're all scratching and clawing for and trying to have some fun too. It was really interesting. Pete de Marilos was playing. He was 10 goals at that time with the La Luchusa. Luis Escobar. There were some very good players in that 14-goal Outback League, and it was really run very well by Jeff and Phil Heatley. And obviously, Tim Gannon was fully supporting this idea of a medium goal and made it fantastic. I mean,
Mhm.
we really had a lot of fun.
Now this time you were playing amongst men. I mean, was this at a time where women's polo, hasn't really taken off yet, or there wasn't that much of a participation?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, there were some women players, but at that time and I felt really lucky. Look, I may not have been a Hope Adiano in terms of generational access to polo, but for Tommy to be playing in the 26 goal and we owned our place in Florida that could accommodate 100 horses and 55 acres with a polo field and a stick and ball field that were just state of the art. That was pretty damn lucky, to have coaches that would help my husband, whether they were Gaston Dorniak or Cacho Merlos or Daniel Gonzalez. I got to reap the benefits too, because I was right in there. If Tommy was busy on a phone conference or had to have a meeting, I'm like, oh, I'll just help you out, Tommy. I'll be at the barn.
Yeah.
And luckily, these guys, which will also amaze me, that these guys who are the top of their game in Argentina, legends that played the Argentine Open and won a lot of silver around the world, would take the time to teach a woman who was eager to learn. And I think that's all it really took was, that desire and eagerness to learn. And Daniel Gonzalez said to me, look, I just like a bottle of red wine out of this deal. If you, because I said to him, how can I pay you, for this? And he said, no, it's just a bottle of red wine. But I mean, so to answer your question, I don't recall there being a lot of women playing in that high goal, the 26 at the time. There are more now. She was there. Jillian Johnson was playing at that. And I think Maureen Brennan was about to get into that. Maybe not quite then in 2006, but certainly later has been and continues to be a good sponsor of the higher level polo and co-ed. And there are just a handful of women that came and went, and
it sounded though as in order to get better at your game, it was a lot of co-ed polo, almost exclusively.
Well, it was, and I was very lucky because I've talked to people in England about this, that there are women playing polo, but it's not co-ed, it's more women specific, and whether it be collegiate and then come out to outdoor polo. So they're not getting that advantage of playing in the men's polo and that speed. It is a big difference, and you just get used to it. You get used to that speed and you get used to your horse's flow, and it's definitely very safe. More, I think there's a higher level of safety in that high goal, as we know, because of the quality of the horses and players. And that's always a pleasure. So it's just very fortunate because, I'm skipping a couple of parts there that after Carolyn Stemmel going to California with Tommy when he played at El Dorado in an 18 goal, when, Fred Mannix's dad, Freddie's dad, Fred was playing for Fish Creek. And there is when Tommy introduced me to Sue Sally Hale, and she was introducing me to the game and giving me chances to learn to ride, just come to her place to try to just learn to ride. And I love spending that time with her and her possums and chickens and, whatever other critters she had around there. And it was lovely lesson in learning, playing a horse in a hackamore, and the umpire looking at that suspiciously, but the horse played. And then after that, to have the privilege to spend time with Sonny Hale, but, that's a whole other story. But again, we're talking about the evolution of learning in the game. So when did you really reach your peak? Well, 2002, I felt pretty good. But by then, of course, I'd had time with Carolyn, with Sue Sally. And then in 2002, I was spending time with Sonny as a friendship. And she just won the women's, the men's U.S. Open. She just won with Adolfo Cambiaso and Phil Heatley and Lola Castagnola and delivered as a polo professional, regardless of her gender. But she really had no ego about that. I mean, again, we related to each other on a different level, independent of polo, as two women who were dating complicated guys who had children and complex relationships with their exes. We were trying to figure out how to manage this, what would be the best way, and we'd compare notes because we both had similar situations in some ways. And that's what brought us together. The polo was secondary, but God, how lucky was I, looking back, to have that friendship with her and her willingness to take some time. And, oh, by the way, your feet are moving too much. You're just flopping on this. You got to stop that. Like, oh, okay.
It sounded though like, through your time of progression, you had a lot of different types of instructors.
I did.
For the most part, or was there the few that you could just lean on for the most part?
No, I think there's a variety. And part of that, again, is just friendship. And then there were pros that Tommy would, that were playing for him at the time, whether it be Javier Novillo Estrada, Paco de Narvaez, Bette Donovan, and Tincho Merlos. I mean, all of these players would offer their time to stick and ball. Look, Tincho Merlos and I would stand out there with just foot mallets and hitting polo balls into a bucket 20 yards away. And he's the one that taught me to do this. Like, hey, look, check this out. You're going to really enjoy doing this because you're competitive, but try the accuracy. And it was so much fun to just make a hole in one in that damn bucket. The sound of it going in there.
Yeah.
It was therapeutic and relaxing as the sun's setting over those fields in Florida to look at all the exotic plants that we planted around that property is part of the fun. And it was an investment for Tommy and I. We never thought that was never our permanent home. We knew it was just a passing interest in at least the property, and we would part ways with it. But while we were there, we made extra efforts to plant as many indigenous plants, certainly in the wetland that we restored, which is about 5 acres, and get all that Chilean pepper out of there and Melaleuca. But in the periphery of that, to be able to plant plants that were for privacy purposes, but also just the joy of having so many varieties of fruits and palms and exotic orchids. And it was wonderful, really, to be on that field before we started irrigating it, at night. I'll never forget those days and the sunsets there in Florida. I'll always remember.
Well, you should be motivated by also accuracy if you played tennis.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hitting the ball down the line and just, smoking it past somebody who
exactly.
never guessed you could do that, or cross court, dropping a little, cut shot just over the net, backhands. I never got into the two-handed backhand, but polo, has its challenges with the near side foreshot, but it just reminds me of tennis in so many ways. And that I give my mom credit for that, because we played all the time, all day in the summertime, and we go to after dinner to lighted court at night and put our 50 cents in and keep going. I loved it.
This podcast episode is presented by the Gay Polo League. The Gay Polo League is the only LGBTQ polo organization in the world that is dedicated to producing high-end LGBTQ polo events and experiences. Its mission is to inspire and empower those individuals who identify themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender via the promotion of and participation in the sport of polo. The GPL promotes the sport of polo to provide equality, pride, inclusion, and confidence for those individuals who face discrimination simply due to identifying themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or other non-traditional sexual or gender identities. GPL works to create an atmosphere that affirms and supports the understanding and acceptance of all individuals regardless of race, sex, or sexual identity, and works to promote goodwill and camaraderie in the community. Its ongoing goal is to raise money at GPL events to help LGBTQ organizations better serve their communities. Our battle cry is, the slightest difference makes all the difference. GPL is changing perceptions in the LGBT community, athletics, and society at large, one chucker at a time. In 2022, the GPL was awarded the Champion of Equity and Diversity in Sports, awarded by the Palm Beach County Sports Commission. We invite you to join us. For more information about the organization, its events, and how to donate, please visit www.gaypolo.com.
So you hit your stride, you would want to say, as early as 22.
Yeah.
In your mind, when did women's polo really start to take off? When did you feel as though like there's an interest level here, sort of thing? Because when I look at it and working with the United States Polo Association, for me, it's pretty recent. I see it as really taking off maybe within the last 5 years. But was there a trend starting to see well before that?
Well, I participated in a variety of women's polo prior to 2002, and I would come home just bruised and battered. My husband was like, "You're not playing this anymore. Some of these women are just trying to prove something." I said, "No, honey, I think we're just trying to figure it out." And yeah, there's some of us that are really competitive and we really want to get the play right, but sometimes we're a little late or we're just a little early. And he said, "I don't want you playing that polo for a while." And then he throws me to the Outback 14 goal, which was incredibly competitive and pretty physical. But that was a great learning ground too, because you step over the boards in co-ed polo, there's no crying in polo, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to be able to endure whatever's coming, and obviously within reason. If something's excessive, the umpires blow the whistle. And there were excessive bumps on occasion, and they were called. But in women's polo, there was this sort of period of time where there was a joke about the snake killing. It's just women going round and round in circles, and there were so many things that could have been changed then, that somehow categorized and sort of put in boxes things like women's abilities. We were all thrown in together like puppies in a pen, and it's like, okay, there you go in a play. And we didn't have any direction, really. It was kind of rudderless in a way. And to me, and at least in the United States, Sunny Hale was solely responsible for finding some way to bring some order to this with her women's championship tournament, the WCT. And right along there with her is Joanne Smickless and Lorraine Casey, closest friends to her, and Dale Smickless and Tiana. I mean, they were there supporting her in her dream and effort and endeavor to, okay, women need to play. There are a lot of women that want to play, but where do they get to play? So she was working to create these tournaments, and she got a lot of support and help from Melissa Gansey and Mark and the Gansey family. And, even to this day, Melissa and the Gansey family are supporting a women's league, which they were the first to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people imitating that structure and format, and it's improving women's polo. But the point is that Sunny Hale started this. It really got well underway by 2006, her women's championship tournament. And at that time, she was making use of a very new, innovative social media tool called Facebook. And she
Mm-hmm.
was posting on Facebook, some profiles about the players and where tournaments could be. And she would have a championship tournament finals, let's say at the Ganseys. The Ganseys would generously host this. And it was something that was sort of a culmination of the year of tournaments around the country, even the world. That Sunny's vision was to have tournaments all over, and they'd be qualifiers for the WCT. She would call them qualifiers. In my opinion, Sunny Hale was really instigated this idea of sort of structured polo for women and creating tournament opportunities and seeking out ways that might help that endeavor. And part of that, later comes along in 2009, a woman in Argentina starts coming up with this idea of a women's handicap. And I think Sunny Hale and Caroline Anier from France and Nina Clarkin were a little hesitant because they'd worked so hard to make their way through the co-ed gauntlet of proving ground and handicap ratings, that they achieved high handicap ratings in the men's.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it we're going to start to consider a women's handicap? But I think what Sammy's idea was not to burden them with just a women's handicap. It wasn't that. It was, listen, why can't we have an additional alongside the handicap, right?
Yes.
Let's introduce another, just like the arena handicap. Why not have a women's handicap?
Mm-hmm.
And so after a year or so, I think Sunny saw the wisdom in this idea because there were serious compression issues. I mean, if you have people between -2 and 2 playing in a women's tournament, there's a vast difference between those players. There's quite a few one-goal women players around the world. But again, even then, they specialize in certain abilities as a back. Like, for instance, Tiffany Bush is very good at back. It's number 4. And she and I are rated the same in the U.S., and I like to play at number 1 because that's what I've done for so many years, playing polo with my husband or with his teams in the high goal. It just was a position that, I never had the chance to play it back, really. But the women's polo has opened these opportunities for a lot of women to play. But the point is that those compression issues are real.
Real quick, when you say compression issues, what are you referring to specifically?
Well, in the handicap scale of the United States Polo Association, the AAP, Argentine Association of Polo, the Hurlingham Polo Association in England, it's -2 to 10. These things have been changing slightly. Sometimes people don't want to be called minus numerals, so they gave them a letter, maybe to make them feel better. I was never ashamed of being a -1. It was just the reality of where my position was in my evolution as a polo player.
Mm-hmm.
And what my true handicap was supposed to be based on what it was for other players. So for majority of women players, and actually majority of players in general that play polo, but a lot of women players are right between -2 and 2. You don't see that many women players reach higher than 2 unless you're a very outstanding player like Nina Clarkin or Sunny Hale was for so long, Claire Tomlinson. So it's just a rarity. And so it was so important to relieve that compression. If you have all these women rated between -2 and 2, for instance, and you try to get them to play in a tournament, typically the outcome would be an imbalanced game.
Yeah.
So invariably you'd find yourself in one team, they'd be stacked with really good one-goal players, and playing against another team that had a few weaker one-goal players. It wasn't fair.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to create a level playing field and also give women something to aspire to, maybe I'm a 0-goal player in women's, but someday I'd like to be 10. Someday I'd like to just make it to 5,
Mm-hmm.
or really good 4-goal player that I will be invited to play on medium and high goal tournaments. So, everyone has their reasons for wanting to achieve a specific goal, I suppose. If they want to improve their string of horses, take lessons, or play as much polo as they can, or spend time with other high goal women players or men players and gain experience and knowledge to improve their own game.
Mm-hmm.
In a workout regimen, whatever it may be. Anyway, the point is that the evolution of women's polo, what I've seen, has gone from somewhat available but not very often and disorganized, and women were just thrown in together on a weekend to play. And usually they borrowed horses. If they didn't own them themselves, they'd borrow them from their husbands or their boyfriends or their fathers or whatever it was. And since then, thanks to, in large majority, to Sunny Hale in 2006 trying to create these tournaments, and then from then Sammy Peruzzi in Argentina coming up with this idea to create a women's handicap to solve the compression issues from -2 to 2 in the mixed handicap, to then give women this opportunity to expand from, well, there's a 0. We don't have anything below 0. Right now, the handicap in the United States is 0 to 10. And that's fine. 0 is someone who barely is able to play the game, and they're learning to ride, and they're hitting the ball occasionally, and they don't really have a lot of field awareness. In Argentina, that's different. 0 goal players are very knowledgeable and they're very capable. So we're still trying to sort that out. But between 0 and 10, there's a whole scale of women players and their abilities. So Nina Clarkin is the 10 goal player, and she's really almost by herself at that handicap rating because she's proven it. And even recently, as the Women's Argentine Open, she won the MVP and demonstrated how well she can play the game, not just as athletic ability, but her intellectual approach to the game as well. So the use of the women's handicap has helped with Sunny Hale's efforts to better organize women's polo and bring it to another level of sophistication and potentially professionalism. So that was sort of her ambition, to not only create that environment for women to come and play and excel in the game and become more professional about it, but she was also trying to expand the possibilities for women players from any other discipline of athleticism, whether you were a soccer player or you were, a barrel racer. And actually, Sunny Hale, from 2006 to about 2014, maybe a little later, she helped, I think single-handedly with her help from her friends. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think her ideas and concepts and push was instrumental in increasing the USPA membership of women from about 22% to at least almost 40%. And this is right before her death. I mean, that's significant. That's double. And since then, there's been this huge blossoming of women players entering the game at all ages at any point in time. And you're seeing a lot of younger girls getting into the sport, which is really exciting. And around the world, it's not just the United States. So if you present these opportunities, then that gives women and girls, an opportunity. If you create the opportunity, it gives them this chance to try. So I think the closest thing I can equate this to is Title IX in 1972, where the U.S. federal government decided they'd give funding to public schools for sports as long as girls could participate too. And prior to 1972, that didn't exist. And I feel like I'm sort of a result of Title IX because I had so many chances to play athletics that were government funded in public schools. It gave me a chance to compete in all kinds of sports. So it's interesting that just at this last Super Bowl for 2022 with the Los Angeles Rams and the Bengals, the coin toss was by tennis legend.
Yeah, Billie Jean King. Yeah.
And she took us back in time and reminded everybody about Title IX and why that was so important. And it is. It's made a difference. So, and that was the same year that Sue Sally Hale was allowed to join the United States Polo Association. And it may have been related. Title IX may have been an inspiration for that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think it was 1971. 71 or 70. No, so you're right, 72. Because it'll be 50 years this year since that happened. And Jory Butler Kent was also along Sue Sally Hale. I think they're the first two they were given handicaps. So that's a good question. I would be curious to know anyone back in the day, did those two things coincide with each other and if it was coincidence?
Well, I've wondered the same thing, and I've never had the chance to ask Stormy Hale, but she would know the answer to that question, I'm sure, or have some, idea about it. And reading more about the women's handicaps in the United States Polo Association, apparently there were some women that had the opportunity even earlier than that, probably back in the 30s or 40s, but time that Louise Hitchcock was around, but they were revoked not long after they were given a handicap because the gentlemen were not happy about it.
Yeah. I heard some crazy quotes of men's responses from back in the day when women's wanted to become members. They escape me right now, but they were pretty astonishing, and more astonishing if they were said in today's world. That's for sure.
It's interesting. As I mentioned earlier in the interview, I'd mentioned that, I learned from Tony Coppola that the women's committee was a social committee. United States Polo Association Women's Committee was not about women's polo. Initially, it was just about a social committee. And in 1988, as recently as 88, in the Blue Book, you will see that women's names were listed by their husbands' names, not their own names.
No kidding.
It would have been Mrs. Tommy Lee Jones, not Dawn Jones, as a member of the women's committee. And I had no idea. I mean, I nearly choked on some barbecue I was having at his place.
Yeah, it's just like that's even surprising for even in the 80s back then. My gosh.
I mean, I'm thinking back, well, maybe I was all wrong about the 80s, but I thought, oh my gosh, this is an interesting revelation. I had no idea. That really motivated me. He said, well, do you think we need a women's polo committee? And I said, no, no, you have one. It's just evolving.
Yeah.
You have women on that committee who are really great players, and you have some on the committee that are not playing now, but they've been around the game for forever. Their husbands were high goal players, and they have something valuable to contribute too. It doesn't mean that, and they played some polo, but not, high goal or anything like that in women's, and that's okay. It's great to have that kind of diversity on a women's committee for sure, to bring, different thoughts to the table on how best to improve things for the future, particularly people who were part of the past, and they've been part of the evolution too.
When did that transformation happen from women's social committee becoming an actual legitimate committee?
When Sunny Hale became the president of the committee, she became the chairwoman of the committee. It's not a president, the chairwoman of the committee.
Like, was this 2006 then, around the time that?
I think it was 2011.
Oh my gosh, no kidding.
Yeah, I think.
Wow.
I think she was running the women's committee, but I'd have to look back and see. This is where Erica Gannon-Sachs could be the perfect candidate. If she were part of this conversation, I bet she could pinpoint that instantly, because she was the chair of the women's committee for several years, and now it's Megan Gracida. But it would be interesting to kind of see how that baton has been passed from one woman player to the next.
Yeah, but it sounds like there's a significant women's polo transformation between 2006 and 2011.
Yes. I got a call from Sunny in 2011. I was in California studying at the Brooks Institute of Photography, and she said, hey, we're going to resurrect the Women's U.S. Open. And I went, what? She said, yeah, I wanted you to see if you wouldn't come play on a team with me and Maureen Brennan and Chrissy Waters. And I said, Sunny, Tommy has said he doesn't want to be playing women's polo because it's pretty rough out there. And it's not that it isn't rough today, but he said, I'm not sure I want you to do that. She said, Dawn, listen, it's going to be amazing. Just come and check it out. We're going to play on the mixed handicap. And she didn't mention anything about a women's handicap. She just said, let's play. It'll be about 4 to 6 goal polo, but it'll be a lot of fun. And I said, all right, for you, I'm going to come from California. I'm going to come play in this. And I'll tell you what, I had the best time. I loved it. It was my first chance to see Leah Salvo play. And I was really amazed by her talent and ability. And she brought a whole different level of playing to the field, kind of like, the Aaron Rodgers to then the Mahomes, it's like a whole new way of playing. She's a classic player. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think Hazel Jackson is more of the Kobe Bryant as compared to Larry Bird player in terms of basketball analogies or football analogies. And I'm mentioning guys, but it just comes to my mind right away as opposed to women athletes. But it's interesting.
Has what happened in between 2006 and 2011, that was primarily in the United States, was that essentially being adopted in other countries and other governing bodies?
Yeah, I mean, Leah Salvo is a product of that. I mean, although when she was 16 or 17, she was working for Lolo Castagnola, helping to work horses for him. And of course, she grew up in a polo family. Her father played, and she's an impeccable rider, and her father's very strict about her riding. I mean, he critiques her all the time, and she's tolerant of it. It amazes me. I said, I might like to take lessons from her dad. But yeah, that was happening. And obviously in England, Claire Tomlinson was playing and made 5 goals years ago, just like Sunny. And, these sorts of achievements were occurring. But again, it was very siloed and isolated, because think about it. I mean, there was not really effective social media until about 2006, when Sunny Hale she had perfected the use of Facebook for the benefit of the Women's Championship tournament. She made player profiles, and she was creating these tournaments and communicating with everybody. And again, the Women's Championship tournament, every club could try to host one, but they were preliminaries to see if you could qualify for the main WCT championship, which has been hosted by grand champions and Melissa Gansey and the family, many years, as support to Sunny and the Smickless family and the Caseys. So it's great that they keep that torch glowing, keep it going. But again, that period of time really laid the groundwork for what came next.
And what did come next? What would be the state of polo and how its transformation today from then?
Well, I'd say that after 2014 is when the United States Polo Association formally adopted the women's handicap as per Sunny Hale's help. If you look at that blue book back then and you look at women's handicaps to describe it to the clubs and the delegates, mentions Sunny's name, and it talks about this conversion table that she was helping to try to perfect from Sammy Perusi's concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make it easier for everyone to understand and implement. So, I mean, here we are in 2022, but in 2017, and that was the year that Sunny passed away, and she and I played together in 2016 in the Women's US Open with Melissa Gansey, and then 2017, I won the US Open with Hope Ariano, and she was only 14 years old, and that was with Leah Salvo and Sarah Weissman.
Okay.
And so from 2014 to 2017 and even 2016, that's just 2 years later and 3 years later, the level of organization that we had to create those teams and the level of competitiveness we had going with players from England and from Texas and from Argentina, it was mind blowing. It was like 200% leap
Mm-hmm.
from 2011 and a 5,000% leap from the days I was playing and enjoying playing women's polo at the Midland Polo Club, 20 years ago, maybe 15.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just more professional. The horse flesh was better. You had to bring better quality horses to the game. We were seeking out some sponsorship ideas. I approached my friend Holly Thagard, who created Supergoop Sunscreen.
Mm-hmm.
Asked her if it was okay if we could put her logo on the back of our jerseys to promote her product, because I really believe in taking good care of one's health, and your skin is just as important as anything else. I mean, we're exposed to the sun so much while we're out on doing what we love on horses. I always say, wear a long sleeve shirt, wear a scarf. That's why I wear a scarf when I play the game.
Yeah.
Just to protect my skin. I mean, melanoma is serious. It's a major problem, particularly fair-haired, fair-eyed skinned people.
Mm-hmm.
So Supergoop was important to me, and I thought it would also demonstrate that women's polo could start to have some kind of NASCAR-like sponsorship on their jerseys to help pay for the tournament fees and offset some of the fees that we pay, which are still, I mean, a drop in the bucket compared to the mixed polo. I mean, the gauntlet fees to play in the USPA Gauntlet series of 3 tournaments at 22 goals is significant. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
So for a women's tournament still to be within reason, within reach is great. I mean, Sunny tried to keep it to a minimum as she could. I mean, her entry fees were, nothing. And look, even Melissa will host some of hers for free for players. Yeah. She's willing to do that to give women the opportunity to compete in some high level polo, whether it's open level, which can be done. It can happen, and she has done it. And sometimes it's a medium goal polo. So I think that, again, trying to introduce that sponsorship and think of it more to get some support elsewhere to help cover some of those costs are really helpful.
I know Pamela Flanagan is one who's a huge advocate for commercializing women's polo. And I think conversations that I've had have been much more, I think, engaging with some of the brands when it comes to women's polo at the end of the day. I think there's more diversity, like you said, sunblock to cosmetics to even like brands like Lululemon, if I'm pronouncing that right. There's just a much more interest. And I think the fact that women in general, not just women polos player, I think have much more better engagement than men, in my opinion. I think there's just much more close-knit group of individuals, word of mouth, I'm going to use what so-and-so is using and so on and so forth. But it's always been positive, and not to mention it opens up the doors from much, much wider than traditional sponsorship, that's for sure. But I know like Pamela Flanagan, I think, has helped bring on a sponsor that will bring in a financial prize to this year's Open.
Yeah, that's really interesting and unique and never been done before, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
To get matching funds from the USPA to put together a prize-winning fund, which is pretty exciting.
Hopefully it'll turn into a purse. Then every single team kind of has the opportunity to benefit, not just one single one.
Again, because of COVID, that's another thing that's really disappointing, is that there was this meteoric rise in women's polo on a lot of levels, and it was getting a lot of attention. And the associations, the AAP, HPA, USPA, and even those beyond, and through FIP, the Federation of International Polo, were all eager to step up and support. We had all this momentum going. The Women's International Polo Network was really doing well at that time. And it's just unfortunate with the pandemic, everything shut down. We had to stop the Women's US Open. And the USPA tried, and IPC certainly tried to pick it up where they left off to have a finals. And that's fine. It's just a shame. It's no one's to blame. It's a pandemic.
Yeah.
There are people that have bigger problems than we do playing polo in terms of the pandemic and losing loved ones and jobs and, their sanity. But we were really lucky we can keep playing this game. So I don't want to complain too much, but I'm just trying to explain in the scope of the evolution and the timeline of events what I remember seeing 20 years ago and watching Sue Sally Hale and then seeing Sunny and other women in other parts of the world pushing for women's polo throughout that time as young women, and then reaching their 40s and 50s still trying to push for women's polo. And now we have these young athletes that, when I was just recently in Argentina, and there were a lot of really impressive young women participating in the Women's Argentine Open from Kenya, from obviously Argentina, United States, England, France. There's some amazing talent, and I just wish that Sunny were still here, because what was really wonderful about Sunny is she was so loving and giving and caring and willing to share all the knowledge that she had with everyone. She set the benchmark for everybody. She could unify, for the most part, most people to follow her lead, because she had the credibility to go with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, what other women have played and won the US Open with Adolfo Cambiaso? Well, none, really. Except for his daughter might get the chance to play, but it's not an easy thing. She was like a comet that just kind of so bright past the Earth, right? And then flew off as brightly as she arrived. And Adolfo, from what I understand, always says that she knew the game better than even most guys. And she proved it. So that's what I miss, because she sets a standard of sportsmanship-like behavior, of quality of play on the field, care for one's horses, creating the American Polo Horse Association that the Ganseys are still keeping going, to keep bloodlines of American horses that nobody did. They were doing in Argentina, but they weren't doing it in America. No one did it in all these generations, of great horse breeders over the years, but they just weren't cataloging it. Maybe the technology wasn't available to really incentivize them to do it. Whereas when Sunny started, we had plenty of data and computers and ways to exchange this information and catalog it. So Nina maybe could take that position, but she's got 3 kids, and her husband, and he's busy, and she's taking care of family and her own family needs and her own. It's not an easy thing. So that's why it was so extraordinary what Sunny did, because she could have easily said, yeah, sure, let somebody else do it. But she didn't. And I'm not saying Nina Clarkin needs to do that. The point I'm making is that she carries that credibility and respect that there's no doubt about her leadership. There's none,
Would you say that internationally that other countries have truly embraced women's polo and its developments just like the U.S. has?
Well, I'd say that Argentina has exceeded the embracement of women's polo, that we're actually following them. They're the first ones that established their Argentine Women's Open at Palermo. That is like Mecca for polo players.
Which you've played in, by the way, right?
Well, I've been lucky to play on field 2 a couple of times, and I'll pinch myself every time I think about it, because it's something that I think every polo player dreams of doing someday. And right there in the middle of Buenos Aires, I mean, it's legendary. It's sacred ground, right? So for them to say, with Milo Fernandez Arajo and Delfina Danga, and I mean, there's countless other people I could name, obviously Adolfo, Estrada family, they all want to support the women's polo. I mean, they have daughters and sisters and even moms that want to play. It's like, all right, let's do this. Of course, their barn gets sort of cherry picked by the women.
Yeah.
Good horses, and good for them, for the benefit of the sport, for its longevity, for its health. To open those doors for women to be a part of it too is a healthy development. AAP is seeking out ways to encourage more and more people to participate, even if it's on the wheel. You get out there with your foot mallet and you ride that wheel and you hit the ball around and have fun. And it's the segue, it's a great idea.
What year did you play the Argentine Open?
I've played the first year they hosted it, and this is the 4th year, I guess.
Okay.
So 4 years ago. So I played in 3, but I didn't play this last year or the year before. This last year, I was just busy reorganizing for more horses, and thank God I didn't play in the Open because I had an injury. But the year before that, COVID was a problem, and my husband had a back surgery, so I did not travel Argentina. It was impossible.
A lot of people I've talked to notice like a different style of play culturally down there. Would you agree that even from the women's polo player, that playing down in Argentina among those players in that situation was vastly different from the way polo is played in the U.S.?
There's a difference in in the way the game is called. They like to let the women play in Argentina. So, fouls, obviously, if it's dangerous, they're going to call a foul. One horse length is enough room for someone to get in and make a play and take the ball.
Mm-hmm.
United States, I'd say they're a little more conservative about it, and they've been trying to let us play. But there's another phenomenon that's going on that's concerning in terms of uneven ride-offs, that there are women here in the United States, they have that desire to play and not enough ability, and they don't have the horses that can handle that pressure. So they're asking their horse to make a play that maybe they get there a little late or too soon or too much of an angle, or their rate of speed is too excessive. And some of these players come from arena, collegiate polo, and in the arena, you can make hard bumps and you're not going far to do it. In outdoor polo, you've got 300 yards and 150 yards wide. There's about 10 acres of room to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Get a horse, going at a high rate of speed. That's a lot of inertia at a high rate of speed, right? So then it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's my first observation, was the umpiring. And the other observation, that for the most part, 99% of the women playing in Argentina, like I said, they're very capable riders, they're amazing horses, and they don't complain. You never hear them talk about what's going on. Every now and then there might be a question to the umpire, but what I really was impressed with is there was never any complaint or talk back or trash talk or any of that. There was none of that.
Yeah.
It's like, we're here to play a game and let's play. And I really love that. And again, that whole phenomenon of the trash talk on the field or the talking back or comments, that's really kind of from the past, but it pops up every now in the United States. And I saw it in one player from another country. This last visit in Argentina, I was playing in a 24-goal women's tournament with Leah Salvo and Vero Manasco, and a really great young player that I enjoy playing polo with. She was only 18, very talented, Sophie Rivas. There was one player from another country that was really trash talking the umpires, but not to their face, off in a corner of the field, complaining about fouls being called. And I spoke to her sponsor later, and I just said, this can't happen. She's so talented. Why is she wasting her time doing this? This is not productive, and it's unseemly. It's a disgrace to the sport, and it's not what we want in women's polo. And Sunny Hale, by the way, would never have done this, and she wouldn't have tolerated it.
You got to transform that energy back into the game in itself.
Well, exactly. And it's like, listen, I'm paying money to come play polo down here. I've made the trip here. I'm making the effort, and I want to enjoy the game. I don't want to hear you trash talking the umpire or other players or complaining. If you don't like it, go play golf.
Yeah.
Go to the driving range and get out of here.
Exactly. Yeah. Take it out on a ball. Yeah. With no one around you.
And you know what? There are a lot of male players that can get into this too. And I'm disappointed, because it's like, what does that achieve, really?
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot more respect. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a lot more respect for players and athletes that just do the best they can and get on with it. Listen, I love McEnroe as a player, but he used to annoy the hell out of me when he started complaining to the line judges.
Yeah.
And I like Bjorn Borg because he didn't have a lot to say, but he'd say it with his racket. That's for sure.
But as a team sport, it's just not one individual just mouthing off to someone and what have you for his own issues. Now you're part of a team. So everything that you do and what you say, it doesn't just affect you. It affects, the other three individuals. It makes everyone else look bad.
Well, it does. And that's why in the position that I've sort of fallen into, and I guess it's because my husband played high goal as a sponsor. Now I'm seen as a sponsor, and I do pay for a lot of the costs of playing some of the women's polo, which thankfully Tommy and I have worked hard, and we're in a position where we can. And I want to help other women players that maybe are not in a position and unable to because of whatever reason, if they're college students or whatever it might be. But I'm looked upon as a sponsor, period. So if that's my role, and I have players playing for me, as my husband has in the past, his rule was keep your mouth shut and don't complain to the umpire. If you're the team captain, you can ask the umpire the question politely.
Yeah.
If there's a doubt in their call. It's never going to change, though. In all the years I've played polo, I have never seen an umpire change their call once it's made.
But you're right. As a team captain, you see it with other sports. You clearly know that the player might be frustrated, but the coach or the captain might go up and say, why did this happen? What did I did not see?
Even as a sponsor, but also team captain of a team in Santa Barbara, and one of my teammates was Sophie Grant, and she had a legitimate question. It's like, why did the whole team get to change horses?
Yeah.
And I politely asked, and my husband was outraged. He was watching from the sideline. What are you doing talking to the umpires?
Yeah.
And I said, honey, I was the captain on this team. I don't know if you knew that, but I wanted to know what happened. And the umpires explained to me that this particular mare on the other team ended up with a spot of blood. A droplet of blood was seen on the shoulder of one of the horses, and they had to stop the game and let that person go switch because it's so strict in California since the Santa Anita track deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Animal welfare is a huge issue in California, and the umpires, they're told this is priority number one. If you see a drop of blood, you're going to stop everything. And that's what they did. And I applaud them for doing it. But I explained this to Sophie Grant. She plays primarily East Coast, which I'm not saying they don't pay attention to the animal welfare there. It's just, it's not as strict. So she said, oh, okay, I get it. And I get that.
This April, the sporting world will be celebrating a momentous milestone as the Lexus International Gay Polo Tournament, presented by Douglas Elliman, returns for its 12th year from April 6th through the 10th. The International Gay Polo Tournament was founded in 2010, and the event has grown in popularity, creativity, and impact, with nearly 3,000 players, attendees, and merrymakers from around the world attending the event annually. The event was created to generate awareness and to move the needle forward for LGBTQ athletes, and to ensure athletes not only have the same opportunities, but also have a safe place to learn, grow, and excel in their sport. Since its inception, the priority has remained to raise a significant amount of money in support of diversity and inclusion initiatives for other LGBTQ organizations. Since becoming a 501c3 organization, the GPL has donated over $30,000 to organizations such as Compass Youth Program and SAGE. This year's event will benefit One Pulse Foundation, an organization born after the tragic events that unfolded at Pulse nightclub, where 49 people lost their lives in 2016. One Pulse Foundation's mission is to create a sanctuary and build a national LGBTQ museum to honor the victims. This year's event will be marked with a full slate of activities and will celebrate with fun, fashion, and of course, polo. The 5 days of festivities will come to a head in a majestic match only rivaled by the creative competitions from the tailgaters when the event returns to the International Polo Club Palm Beach in Wellington, Florida. To learn more about this year's event and to purchase tickets, please visit www.gaypolo.com. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you at this year's must-attend event.
It's one thing to let the players play the game, but it's another thing if you're seeing things that are not 100% right. There's something off and something catastrophic could happen, because in polo, we're dealing with 1,000 pounds under every player, and it can be dangerous. I mean, we have to admit that. We try to be careful, and we take care of our horses, and we love our horses and our teammates and even our opponents. We're all friends. But sometimes the adrenaline gets going, and we all want to compete. And sometimes there's a lot on the line, and people, they put a lot of money into this, and they want to see results. But, again, I come from an environment and atmosphere where Tommy, he insisted that we respect the umpires, win or lose, shake hands, walk away, because at the end of the day, it's a ball game.
Yeah. I feel Tommy might be a good commentator.
I think he might not say much so on some occasions, and then he might be brutally honest. So I'm not sure if that would work out so well.
I think we need our own Collinsworth out there helping to call the game.
He's not the color commentator that I could really imagine. I mean, I think of a few that really keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Howard Cosell, I thought, was quite good, in the old boxing days. And or Don Meredith, I'd kind of like those sorts of color commentators.
Yeah. So women's polo's trajectory has been incredibly fast.
In the last years.
Yeah. I mean, just in the last decade, it's just full throttle. But it seems that there's far more good coming out of it than there are any sort of negative issues. But if you were to, and I'm assuming that, anything growing that fast are good problems to have, are there things going on within the women polo that are currently an issue that are solvable? Or are they good problems to have? Or are they affecting the sport that could really ruin it?
It's not going to ruin the sport, but I identified it earlier. There is a phenomenon occurring in the last year and a half or so, 2 years. I'm with all this competitiveness and the better quality horses. I'm noticing that there are more uneven ride-offs that need attention. Everybody can make a mistake once or twice. I mean, we all do it. Listen, I've bumped Hope behind the saddle we were playing a charity match and we were getting after it. I mean, it was a charity match, but everybody was going after it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were having fun. I was riding horses I didn't know they were good horses. I'm not saying they weren't good. They were good horses, but it's a lesson to me to be more careful on horses that are not my own. If I go into a play, if I can't get there on time, I got to wait for the next play.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up bumping her behind the saddle, and it wasn't egregious. I mean, it wasn't like at an angle, but I apologized to her right there because I knew I was late, and after I'd done it, and I knew it was wrong. And she said, "Oh, don't worry about it, Dawn. I understand."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's always that's another heroic figure, as young as she is, to be very passive about things that go on in the field, but she's very fair for what I've seen. I've only seen her make a couple of mistakes. She made a mistake in the Nations Cup with Hazel Jackson, and Hazel was pretty vocal about it. But, Hope was just, she had no intention of trying to run her over or hurt her. It was just, it happened. These things happen. But there are situations where if people have done it a few times, it's time to learn to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to like, okay, I really need to fix this. So some of the younger players coming out of collegiate, like I said, there's a new issue going on and Charlie Muldoon with the United States Polo Association, head of the umpires, he's aware. He's working with Maureen Brennan, the women's committee, Megan Gracita, and talking with the umpires about this recent development and phenomenon of there are more accidents occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And there are players like myself. I've actually brought this up myself because I've observed this as well. It's more frequent than I've known before. I want to make sure that we take whatever measures are necessary to nip it in the bud and help players be re-educated about a proper write-off. And I even suggested, what if we had a short video that plays during Global Polo on the broadcasting, live streaming of these games? They show how the rules work, basic rules for the average person watching the game, and they may not know a lot about it. Why not have a video, maybe a 15 or 20 spot to show a proper write-off?
Mm-hmm.
And why not have players like Nina Clarkin or Hope Adiano demonstrate what it is?
Yeah.
It's like, play the game safe and have fun. Enjoy the game. And here's how we can enjoy it and be able to play the game tomorrow too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. I mean, do you think that's just people just kind of being careless, or just there's a lack of attention being made on the field? Is it?
No, it's eagerness to please. It's eager to make the play they saw Hazel make.
Uh-huh.
Well, I can do that too. Well, I'm sorry, but you know what? Hazel has extraordinary abilities, and she's a really good rider, and she can ride anything, and she knows what her limits are, and she knows when she has the right horse to make the right play, and she'll thread the needle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't have that many experiences of Hazel riding out of control, taking somebody out. And like I said, there's the one-off time even Nina can make a mistake, okay? But I'm just seeing some players trying to make some kind of spectacular play or win the game or whatever it is, and it's a ball game.
Yeah.
And I've heard other women say this. It's like, well, really, we're just playing 4 to 6 goal polo. What's wrong with these women? It's not like it's 26 or 30 goal or 40 goal polo in Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
What is the deal? Well, everybody's competitive. They're all athletes. And the difference is, though, if you want to be competitive on a tennis court or you want to be a competitive soccer player, yeah, you might have your moments where you're going to take somebody out on the field, sliding under them, trying to get the ball out from underneath them. But with a polo horse, that's another deal.
Yeah. Those aren't the plays that are going to get you drafted to a better team.
No. And not everything is live streamed, but there's a lot of things that are. And it's going to start to become, you'll be the poster child for the wrong type of write-off. So yeah. I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk about this with you at this moment in time, because it's an issue that's not a tidal wave. It's just a ripple, but it's important enough to take notice and address it.
Yeah. Well, and you said, better to nip it in the butt before it becomes a real bigger problem.
Right. So this is not going to ruin the sport. The women's polo is still a great thing, and there are ways to keep promoting it. I mean, listen, people like Robin Sanchez that helped create this Texas arena circuit. I heard there were 30 some odd teams that participated of women players.
Mm-hmm.
Houston. And how fantastic is that? That's a lot of women players.
That is a lot of women players.
All want to play and have fun and enjoy it. And so within all those players, though, if they start seeing these uneven write-offs and think that's okay, and somebody has just dropped a yellow card or even a red card on that moment, it's going to have to start happening. And like I said, I wish there were a video with someone like Nina and Hope, because those are two women that are highly respected, even as young as Hope is. She's really respected here in the United States. They have influence.
Mm-hmm.
They're not influencers, but they can influence people thinking. And if it's demonstrated from them, especially Nina, it's just my opinion. I mean, I think it would really help. And when I see her next, I might say, look, would you be willing to do this? Because I mean, I'd almost be willing to pay for the short video to get it done, and ask Pamela to get Rob involved. It's like, let's just shoot this, get a drone. Let's get a couple of camera angles. Just do a quick little spot. And
man, people want to learn from the best.
Why not? I mean, it's like,
why not?
If you get some kind of little tutorial from Phil Mickelson, or Tiger Woods or Serena Williams, well, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. It's important because everyone has their ambassadors or mentors in the sport. And obviously people want to learn how they do it because as they see it, how they do it is what has made them a success at it.
Yeah.
I want that attitude. I want that level of play. How does she do a backhand or a forehand different from others?
Yeah. You don't necessarily need a whole clinic to get this done. But this in particular, with the safety in mind, I mean, I can't really have it a parallel to NASCAR, but when Dale Earnhardt crashed into that wall, the idea of having a special brace inside the car that every driver would have to adopt, to me, was a great idea. It may have saved his life. And it's a tragedy that he died on the track that day. We're talking about a sport that involves a high rate of speed. And if you lose control or something goes wrong, it can be really dangerous.
Yeah. We talked about this before, but look how, influential even Formula One and how far they've come along. Le Mans, which essentially is the birthplace for so many vehicles because the vehicles they drive on there ultimately are what we drive in our regular lives. Windshield wipers, high beams, and all those types of things. I think we're almost all vented from Le Mans. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back because you mentioned this a few times during our podcast, and that is the Women's Polo Network. What was the motivation behind creating something like that? Was it to fulfill a need or was it to do something more than just that?
Well, at the time, Erica Ganem-Carsacks, Pamela Flanagan, myself, Cecilia Cochran, Kim DeLashmet, even some other friends, Courtney Azadorian, Paige Boone. It was interesting that, and a lot of women just in general, that we would have practice together, and after practice, we'd share pros and cons of what just happened and how can we improve this and how can we make this better, like at Melissa's league or at practices at other friends' fields, and we all thought, wouldn't it be great, if the United States Polo Association website had more information about each player? And wouldn't it be great to network, though, outside of the United States Polo Association? Because the association, their role is to promote polo in the United States. And they have a lot of work to do as it is, right? There's so many committees and there's so many programs like the collegiate or interscholastic and youth polo and polo training foundation. I mean, it's overwhelming. There's so much going on. So to accommodate the request of the women players who now finally had a women's committee and our own handicap, which happened in a matter of seconds in comparison to the history of the sport, right? And women's involvement. They really didn't have the capacity to accommodate those requests. So then we thought, well, why don't we just build a website, a real solid platform website that can grow as big as a World Center one of the tallest buildings in the United States. Every floor can be added. Why not start with something and let's get everybody to contribute to it? We'll just start putting the word out that we're putting a GoFundMe page together to build this website. A lot of it was funded by people from around the world. And we thought, why can't we network with each other globally? We're not trying to compete with USPA or AAP or FIP or HPA. What we're trying to do is to introduce women to each other that play the game from around the world. And we wanted to give women the opportunity to create their own player profile and maintain it. And we thought, well, if everybody invested money in this, whether it be $5 or $10,000, which thank God a couple of women did. Sarah Magnus contributed 10 grand, and so did Kendall Plank's family, Susan Plank. She saw value in this and wanted to contribute to it. So that helped give us a nice jump start, along with everybody's contributions, as I said, from 5 to 500 or 1,000 or whatever it might have been. We thought, well, if everybody had this and they'd have an interest in trying to maintain this website, it would be something of theirs as well. It wasn't just an association independent of them. It actually belonged to them. So that was our ambition. We'd hoped it would instigate and inspire women to take control of this network on their own, with even their own player profile, and maintain it somehow. And we wanted to work with clubs. And listen, the clubs are very supportive. I mean, Guards Polo Club in England stepped right up. They're like, what can we do to help? And We just didn't have enough funding at the time to make the clubs as visible as the player profiles, and the making of the player profiles and the club profiles were really labor intensive. We were trying to simplify it in a way, but what complicated it, mucked it up a little bit, is that we were trying to write a filter of searching, a search engine within the site, so you could filter it by handicap or filter it by location, club membership. You see what I'm saying? So we had all these cross references to try to help you find that player so you could build a team. Like baseball cards, we line up all the baseball cards, you look at their team, like, okay, here are the handicaps, let's build this team. That was our ambition, because there were players in England that didn't know anybody in the US and vice versa. And then what ended up happening, which is kind of extraordinary, is that one of the earliest player profiles was a woman from Iran wearing her hijab. And she posted photos of her teammates winning a trophy in Iran, all wearing their hijab. And it was beautiful to see this. And they don't even have a polo association that I'm aware of. They sure don't have a women's handicap. But it was still extraordinary to be able to see this camaraderie from people I'd never even met. Since the creation of this, it's like a phenomenon, though. And I'm not blaming young women that they don't have an attention span. I'm not suggesting this. It's just a lot easier if you have Instagram or TikTok or Facebook on your phone. To have an app is actually a more useful way of using that particular tool than your laptop or an iPad. To have to log into a website that isn't just an app on your phone is more labor intensive than what most people want to do, because it's a matter of instant gratification. I mean, we know that the attention span of most people is about 6 seconds.
Yes.
And then they swipe to something else. So I'm not blaming the young women of polo for not putting this through, but it's like, it just feels like here's another situation. We were optimistic about this and had faith in other women out there. We thought, okay, if we present this and we build it, there will be other women that start trying to contribute. And there are a few, but then there are quite a few that also, they're just busy with their own lives.
Yeah. They're
academics. They're busy with their families, creating a family. I mean, that's another thing that male polo players don't necessarily have to think about, is getting pregnant. Get pregnant with their wife, but a woman polo player like Nina Clarkin takes a full year off from the sport to have a child. And I know her husband obviously is there caring for the children too, but you know what I'm saying? It's like he doesn't have to take time off from the horses and hang up his mallets for 9 months or however long. And the idea with creating the network was not only connecting women, but was also creating a calendar of events that we could identify tournaments year round. And we were trying to work with the clubs to create a schedule in certain regions of the world and color code it based on the color coding that the Federation of International Polo was using for A, B, and C countries to duplicate that. And we were humming along and buzzing along, but we reached sort of a ceiling, and that we couldn't go further unless we had more funding. And the pandemic struck about the same time that we were getting to that point. But we had a lot of enthusiasm from a lot of women around the world that believed this, from Australia, from New Zealand, from England, France, Spain. I was getting emails from all over the place, Canada. Recently, there was a woman who had the first snow polo in Canada, and it was for women and girls. And what a great idea. It's like, they're Canadians. They should be having snow polo all the time.
Yeah. So did it kind of hit a plateau a little bit? Do you think it was mostly because of COVID?
It's a combination. It's COVID, and some of us in the Women's International Polo Network that were directly involved had some personal issues going on in their lives that distracted them from the focus that we'd had devoted to it prior. We all volunteered our time.
Yeah.
We have to pay our monthly operating fees, operating costs, or annual operating costs. Those still exist. That doesn't just go away.
It don't go away. No.
It's there. But that's what's interesting about this. This is a Formula One race car. It's not just a social media page. It's a real.
And you also mentioned, it's a website, but it's not accessible via like an application that you would get on your tablet or your smartphone. I think that would probably be something, the next evolution of it, correct? Because people's attention spans, they want something at their fingertips instead of having to open up a laptop.
Exactly. And that's what we miscalculated. The 5 of us, or 6 or 7 or 8 of us were thinking about it. And it came up briefly. I don't remember who brought it up, thinking about apps and how everybody's using apps so frequently now. And what we were just like, okay, we're just going to try to do what's never been done before. There was no playbook on how to do this. There was no operating manual, or how to manual to build it. We were literally building from scratch based on what all these different players thought might be useful. And we had our wish list, and we achieved a majority of those wish list items, but we weren't able to, we haven't been able to continue to see it flourish, but it's still there. That's the good news. And it can pick up again. As I said, we just did this sort of profile of these women, that they're snow polo, which is awesome that they put that together up in the Ontario, Toronto area and had some good fun doing it. And we'll try to revisit that. We'll try to put more dates on the calendar. There aren't any there now, but we'd like to. And we'd like it to be a way to unify the community. It's not like we're competing with somebody else. We're just, come on, everybody get together. Let's support this in addition to whatever you're doing, because it's a healthy thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we have more women involved, then we have a bigger voice at the table when there are decisions being made about certain tournaments. And I try to inform people about certain dates of when to host certain events, because otherwise it's conflicting with another event somewhere. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Let's try to make it, let's say people that want to do this more frequently can go to various places in the world and plan their annual lives based on these calendar dates that we were hoping that would be staples.
Mm-hmm.
Once they're established, just keep it that way. But it's hard. You got to have a full-on group of women from all over the world pushing for this and working in unison. And it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
It's like anything else in this world. I mean, you've got so many personalities and you've got so many opinions.
Like you said, it's volunteer. No one's getting paid for it. They have to be self-motivated to do it. It hasn't died or anything like that. Do you think you'll kind of go through a next era of funding of some kind to push to make it much more accessible to people's busy lives?
Well, yeah, I think there's 3 things going on there. Number one, if we had an app, that might be a game changer, but apps are not cheap. That would be a big ask. The second thing is we can resurrect what's been idle. It's been in hibernation, a little wake up when we can start continuing to add more details and see if we can, in just even word of mouth of the community. It's like, come on, guys, help us get this going. Let's send us some stories about what you're doing. And that was also instrumental, is to get women to get a chance to contribute to the site. And there was also this resource page. If you want to host a women's tournament, here's how you can do it. If that's outdoor, if you want to host an indoor, here's how you can do it. And there was a checklist created by a woman up in the Newport, Rhode Island Polo Club. I believe it was Amy Cunningham, and she was a former naval intelligence officer, and she was really good at making checklists for admirals.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fascinating to see all these different women come together with different skill sets as lawyers, as former naval intelligence officers, and all contributing to this passion for the game of polo to connect us all in some way. And I think we can resurrect it. And so the first thing is the app. The second thing is resurrecting it. And the third thing, it'd be great if we could have a new funding round in order to create an easy button to make the player profiles and an easy button for the club profiles, so the clubs will be more visible.
Mm-hmm.
That way women can just click on the club and say, you know what, I want to go to Soto Grande and I want to play this summer. And what is offered for women's polo? What do they do over there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the way, they have a women's tournament and it happens at X time of year.
Yeah.
And why not go?
Mm-hmm.
And the club would be glad to accommodate. They want to promote their women's polo, so why not? That's what we were trying to achieve. So the clubs would be motivated to support the women's polo because the women could see it and then be able to get there and enjoy their visit, make it like a polo vacation. That was sort of the idea. And we were never making any money off this. I mean, again, it was all voluntary and it was not for profit. In fact, it's a nonprofit organization. And that's why it was so generous of Susan Plank and Sarah Magnus to make their contributions, which we post online. We post everybody that's made a contribution.
Yeah.
And we had this ambition that we'd have some advertising, because we have the advertising board available on the website. But, we didn't really vigorously attack that yet. We figured we'd get to it. We just did not leap on it hard enough. And even Iono gloves, they said we would be glad to. And they'd make knee pads and elbow pads too. And this woman that started that company, whose name escapes me at the moment, she's wonderful. And she said, I want to support anything women are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another thing about Supergroup and Holly Thagard. She's like, okay, I'm a woman entrepreneur. You guys are women trying to put this together. We'll support you. And you can use our logo.
I would encourage you to leverage, I think it's Patreon, which essentially, podcasters, game developers, and so on and so forth use it as a means to generate donations or funding for their projects. And they can be a member of it in so many different levels, from $1 to $150, and they're paying on a monthly basis. So something to look into.
But listen, let me tell you, it's been interesting. The U.S. Polo ASSN has been very supportive of women's polo. USPA understood what our ambitions were and did not object, were supportive, and continue to be, even though it's been silent in terms of being sort of dormant at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I have to give them credit too. It's like Shannon Stilson, the senior marketing director, and Michael Prince and Cunningham, and everybody, Cunningham, they've all been really supportive of this idea, and they see the value in including women because, listen, in my household, I do most of the shopping for things, for
Mm-hmm.
clothing, for whatever product we need at the house, for skin products, whatever it is. My husband, he just knows that I will find it and bring it to the house, or he'll steal it off a movie set, one of the two.
Yeah.
We're the consumers. We're the number one consumers in the world. So it makes sense for us to be supported by brands that want some attention. But in order to get brands like La Prairie or Lancome, it's not an easy thing.
No.
It's more localized. It's not global. And they have their ad campaigns. And it's also something they do months in advance, sometimes a year in advance. You've got to present these sponsorship decks so far in advance and hope that maybe you might fit into their whatever it is they're trying to do. So I don't know.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we could have a separate podcast on that discussion alone, but the timing it takes to really lure brands in can be a multi-year conversation. But a lot of it is educating. A lot of the times it's staying on people's radars and trying to be relevant alongside other people who are trying to pitch the same thing. If cornhole and drone racing league and pickleball, if they can do it, polo can do it.
Yeah, but pickleball is so popular. I mean, Andy Bush, who was an amazing athlete, played remarkable polo. He had an accident at his farm over there near Santa Barbara, and broke his leg. But he's fine now. But he found pickleball in the meantime, and he loves it.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've heard, he really enjoys the game. And I cycle in Santa Fe. Our house is about, 13 minutes outside of town. And I cycle from our house into town and back out again. And I always pass by this pickleball court, and it's full of people.
Yes.
They're loving it. So there again, we talked about accessibility. Polo is not as accessible to most people unless they get that Segway wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe they can participate. And that's something that the Argentine Polo Association has identified, and they think it's worthwhile. As long as you're wearing a helmet, maybe some wrist guards or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's the price factor when it comes to getting involved in polo. But I know when we started the Oak Brook Polo Academy a few years ago, and the Polo Academy in reference is probably about, I want to say 30 minutes outside the city of Chicago. So we're the closest place that you could pick up the sport to a major metropolitan market. And on top of that, so being so accessible to populated areas, we're year round. So it's not just a warm weather outdoor thing. They're pushing it indoors and what have you. And arena, obviously, that's a great place to do it. But we have two new directors, Jenna Davis and Turner Wheaton, who are doing a fantastic job, have within 2 years double the participation. It's like we're in the 40s now, which is really good for a single academy like is that, with students and people who are picking up the sport and enjoying it and leasing horses and ultimately buying.
Yeah.
They've been doing a fantastic job. But I mean, in addition to obviously having a great name like the Oak Brook Polo Club to attach to it, but they made it truly accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the bigger drivers at the end of the day.
I agree with that. And, look, there are all these other benefits. For instance, again, I want to applaud Sarah Magnus and Melissa Gansey for supporting the Work to Ride Polo to build an arena for them up in Philadelphia. And I really like seeing Harvard Polo associate themselves with the veterans PTSD, home base for therapeutic riding. I mean, there's just so many beneficial things. And even look, the Vero Beach Polo Club and the Special Equestrians of the Treasure Coast, very beneficial. And that's the bigger picture. It's not just people riding around in white breeches. I mean, there's so many benefits we have to try to explain and share with the outside world. Maybe they may take more of an interest. To me, Oprah would get that instantly.
You're right. I mean, you mentioned equestrian therapeutic with, soldiers who have PTSD. I mean, there's a mental health awareness and contribution that polo has. And it's just not just the sport, but it's just about being around horses for that matter.
It's healthy.
So
it's healthy for the entire community,
And then polo ponies that you train on and so on and so forth, you couldn't ask for a better horse to do that stuff with.
Yeah, practically bomb-proof.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of the future of women's polo, what's next? I'm hearing rumors that the FIP are going to be creating their Women's World Championship. I don't know when that's going to ultimately happen, but I'm hearing rumors that something's trying to be organized. What is the future of women's polo like in the next 5 years?
Well, there is actually a World Cup going on. FIP and the AAP have organized.
Okay.
That's not a rumor.
Okay. It's fact.
It's a certainty.
Okay.
And in fact, it's been confirmed to take place this coming April in Argentina. This is exciting news.
Yeah.
We'd like to see teams from around the world get a chance to play. And it's something we've actually been working on in the women's committee of FIP to organize to get the right handicap level that's safe, that will allow as many countries as possible to participate. It's going to happen between April 9th and April 17th of 2022 at Pilar and Palermo's AAP polo fields. So the AAP is hosting the championship, and everyone's going to have to get their own horses at this point. But in the future, they'd like to get a pool of horses like the J5 to try to host it. But they don't want to just host it in Argentina, but it's a great place to start because they have more control and everybody knows each other and it works. So we'd sure like to try it in the United States. And if a world championship can be done for the men with the J5 horses, why not with the women? So
correct.
I think that's coming. What we're trying to see for the future women's polo is, again, more and more tournament opportunities, which is what Sunny Hale was striving for back in 2006 and maybe even earlier than that in her mind.
The fifth trophy, like the Lombardi trophy, should be named after her.
Yeah, we've talked about that, and a lot of people would like to name trophies after Sunny, that's for sure. No one's against that idea.
No, not at all. To this day, I always had to educate people. Why do they call it the Lombardi trophy? And it's just like, that's named after someone. Like, oh, really? Then why?
Vince Lombardi. And amazing.
The greatest coach ever.
Yeah, really incredible.
So to end, this podcast on, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if you didn't have the opportunity to talk about the horses that you love. And I wrote a great article on a horse that you own, Pretty Bird Woman. Is that right?
Yeah. She's on the ranch. She's retired now, but what a special, unique treasure she is. And Tommy and I met her in Montana, and we met her owner just a few weeks before we met her, Chuck Realbird and his son Sean, and they were running the Wild Indian Relay Race at the YO Rodeo in Sheridan. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Wild Indian Relay Race or have ever heard of that.
I have not.
But it is extraordinary, and I think you should look it up when you get a chance because there are several tribes and nations that compete against each other. And it's serious, man. They get 3 horses out there and they've changed 3 times and they can't come off the horse. They're riding bareback and they've got holders on the sidelines and holding those horses by their ears. I mean, they're not the most highly trained horses. They have to ride what they've got. They just get after it. It's great to see them compete, and they take pride in their ability as riders, in their teams and their nation. The Sioux and the Crow and the Cheyenne. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. It's intense. And during the course of that race, Tommy was a judge. Tommy Wayman enlisted him as a judge. And Tommy Lee asked Wayman, so, okay, well, what are the rules? And then Tommy Wayman said, well, there ain't none. But come and be a judge anyway. Then we met Chuck Realbird at that time, and he invited us to come to his place up in Garryo in Montana if we had the chance. And I decided to make a special trip up there and take my camera because I'm a photographer. I thought I'd get a few photographs. And I met with Chuck Realbird and his son, Sean, and Chuck was actually in a sweat lodge right on the Little Bighorn River. And they're literally on the Little Bighorn battlefield at their house.
Oh, wow.
And the Little Bighorn River is dotted with cottonwood trees. And the hills up above it's sparse in terms of places to hide. You can forget about it. So I can tell you that Custer and Benteen and Reno had a pretty rough day. And Custer thought he could just run in there and everyone would run off. And look, he was warned by the Crow Scouts. One of them was named White Man Runs Him. And Edward Curtis, a photographer, photographed that scout, White Man Runs Him, a few times. And he had said to Custer, this is not a good day to go in. And Custer didn't believe him. But there were 7,000 very angry Indians down in the valley. And they didn't have a good day because we know what happened at the last stand, right? And there's still artifacts to be found around there. And Chuck Realbird, he's got all these paint horses that he's very proud of. And one of them had won a race in Michigan and won $1 million. It was a paint. That's the sire of Pretty Bird Woman. And I was just so charmed by these horses, and they took such good care of them. I mean, their barn was just so well cared for, better than their own house, really. And they were so proud of their horses and brought out several for me to look at just to see them. And I said, well, any of these for sale? And Chuck said, yeah, depends on the person, but yeah. And I said, well, I'm going to come back with some friends and take a look. And we did, and tried a couple of them, Miss Red Earth and Pretty Bird Woman. And she was probably 3 at the time. And I just said, she's the one. That's the one. She's got nice conformation, and maybe she'll come around to polo, but maybe not. We don't know yet.
Yeah.
It wasn't really the intention. And the Realbird family brought that mare down to San Saba, Texas, which is probably a 30-hour drive. They brought her down, and within a few days after we'd left Sheridan, Wyoming, and Chuck Realbird handed her off to Tommy, and he was so delighted to be able to sell this mare to Tommy and to our family. And, she came around to polo. There were a lot of different people over the years that schooled with her and rode her. And I had the privilege of getting to play her in El Dorado in 2010. And Sunny Hale was out there at that time. And she kind of intrigued by the mare. And man, that mare could play, and I was busy with my schooling at Brooks Institute of Photography. And I did not really get into the more competitive polo at the time, but played her here and there. And she always delivered. And was always such a pleasure to be around. She really was a treat to be around people. And the other horses were kind of mean to her. They'd pull her hair out or her tail or her mane and just she looked different. Maybe they're discriminatory as well as monkeys are, I suppose.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, she's in a great place now and can live out the rest of her years of her life with two incredible people. That's for sure.
Well, she's well loved.
She's definitely well loved. Hey, Dawn, I incredibly appreciate the time that you spent with me today and talking about women's polo and your upbringing into the sport. You are a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure, and helping to advance this game, not just in general, but in women's polo, that's for sure. I can't wait to get the chance to meet you. I would love to visit your ranch down in Texas. And yeah, thank you again so much. And thank you for capping off a wonderful season 2 podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I know it took us a little while to get here because I was always busy or you were busy, and we finally connected. So I'm glad we could finally have this wonderful conversation. And, again, it's my involvement in all this polo and women's polo is just because I happen to love the sport. And Sunny Hale, certainly, she really inspired me and motivated me to try to keep it going. When she passed, I thought, okay, and I was not the only one. We have to kind of continue to carry this torch for her and keep it alive and well. And I just wish she were here to see it. I wish she were here. I miss her a lot. But anyway,
for the love of the game.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner, right? In
that
movie?
Yeah. So
yes.
but we have lots to look forward to. And that's the bright side, always looking to what's next. And there are good things coming. And there's just few little blips we got to sort of iron out, and we'll get there.
Well, you have my support, that's for sure.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts about the game and what I think is important for women's polo in particular.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Dawn, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Well, have a great evening.
That was a great episode. What is the one thing you learned from today's conversation? If this episode had an impact on you in some way, then I encourage you to visit and subscribe to our website at outsidetheboards.com for more episodes and interviews with incredible guests. Thanks for stopping by, my friends, and hope to see you on the polo field.